Our thoughts are part of what makes us human. They determine our mood and ultimately impact how we feel. And a lot of times, when our mood takes a dive, it seems to come out of left field. But if we actually take a step back, we can usually detect an unhelpful thought behind it. And when you uncover that thought and challenge it, you can take control over your mood. The thoughts you have and emotions you feel give your life meaning. And today we're going to help you rethink those thoughts to feel better more often. Welcome to Hot Topics. I am your host and human performance coach manager, Molly Proct. And today's guest is one of Aduro's mental health coaches. In her coaching session, she helps people overcome the feeling of being stuck and makes plans to take control of their mental well-being. I'm so excited to have Mackenzie Bannister here to talk about how to challenge unhelpful thoughts that leave us feeling out of control and gather a few ideas on how to overcome them. Welcome, Coach Kenzie.
Thanks. I'm really excited to be here today with you, Molly.
Yes, I am so excited to chat with you as well. You know, Kenzie, you and I get to work really closely together day in and day out, and we get the opportunity to chat about these things often. But I rarely put myself in the subject seat. So I'm very excited for today. And I know that I navigate through a lot of thoughts throughout my day. And depending on the day, most of them can be really challenging and can determine my mood most of the time. And I feel like mood is something that seems to be an easy identifier for someone's energy in any given day, right? Like, oh, today I'm in a good mood. Today my husband's in a bad mood. It seems like it's commonly our go-to quickly analyze someone's demeanor, right? In doing so, I feel like we sometimes skip over the thoughts that have triggered or impacted that mood. And so tell us a little bit about how our thoughts impact our mood and ultimately our overall mental health.
Yeah, I know naturally kind of my instinct is that our mood and our thoughts come from a different place, but they really are both coming from our brain, which is a very impressive organ. On average, it's asked to process 50,000 thoughts per day. And so, as you know, throughout your day, we're constantly bombarded with information from our surroundings. The mailman just rang the door. The dogs are barking. I'm smelling dinner cooking. Oops, it's burning. That's what happens in my kitchen.
Yep.
The kids are causing some sort of trouble. An email came in. It's everything. And it's a lot for our brain to process. And we simply can't deal with all that information. So, to help us process, we attach those feelings to the experience. And we filter our thoughts by how they make us feel. So, did that make me happy?
Mm.
Sad? Am I nervous about that email from my boss? And so, that feeling we land on actually helps us focus our attention and choose our response or our action. And our brain always follows this predictable order. We have a thought, it creates a feeling, and then we act on it. And since there's a lot of thoughts happening really fast, we have to make it easier on our brain. So we form habits or patterns of thoughts. And I like to think of thought patterns as a shortcut for the brain so we can move towards action faster. So when I'm sad, I do this. When I'm frustrated, I do that. No matter what the situation is, we learn to follow that thought pattern we've created. And in some cases, it's a good thing, but some of our patterns are unhelpful and they end up making us feel worse or they really create a bad mood. And when we feel bad, the unhelpful patterns can bring out more unhelpful thoughts. And so it starts this cycle of negative thoughts, which negatively impacts our moods. And then when our mood is regularly low, our mental health begins to suffer. So, in short, I know that was a long winded answer, but we filter our thoughts by attaching feelings to them, and that feeling sends us into a predictable pattern.
Makes so much sense. And the feelings piece, when we think about thoughts and moods, we glance over the feelings. And I know feelings for a lot of people can be uncomfortable because we don't necessarily recognize the control over feelings, right? And, you know, this pattern, this predictable pattern that you mentioned, I talk about this quite often with my own therapist. And I like to refer to it as the tornado. It's Molly's tornado. And if I'm not aware of those feelings, I get sucked into this negative thought tornado. And ultimately, I can't get out of it until that tornado dissipates. And of course, it leaves this little trail, this little mini path of destruction in my day or in my time or in my mood. And so this unhelpful thought pattern, which is what I'm hearing from you, triggered from feelings. How do we kind of fall into that consistent, kind of unrecognizable pattern that really leaves us feeling bad?
Yeah, great question. Well, it's coming from those mental shortcuts. That's really the source of the problems. And because our brain is going into those patterns or taking that shortcut, we might miss things. Or a lot of times we make assumptions that don't match up with reality. And just like you said, we don't realize what's happening. And so that's how we fall into these unhelpful thought patterns, where again, we're attaching those negative feelings to the thoughts that aren't 100% accurate. And then those feelings take control and they reinforce the thought pattern or that tornado. And it tells me, tornado, keep coming, keep coming. And eventually we end up feeling stuck. And feeling stuck can cause us to feel hopeless about our lives and powerlessness to change it. And that lack of control is really difficult and can greatly impact our mental health. And so it's again, those unhelpful thought patterns are false or inaccurate thoughts that negatively impact our mood and mental health.
And I've heard, and I know you work with a lot of people about these inaccurate, unhelpful thoughts. And again, I go through my own as well. And you mentioned something that, these thoughts, these feelings create assumptions. And I think oftentimes we don't realize that we are actually creating an assumption that may or may not, most of the time, may not be true. Right. And so our thoughts that end up being assumptions or end up being inaccurate that are not based on reality feel very real for someone who's in it. How can that happen? How can we really attach to these false assumptions that we kind of unconsciously create that can be so harmful?
Yeah. I think the biggest thing that leads us into it is a lot of times we have this belief that our thoughts are always true. My brain told me this, so it must be true. And that's not the case. Our thoughts are not always true. And so it's important to recognize that and acknowledge that and kind of take a moment to slow down. And when you recognize those thoughts aren't true, most often you can recognize that unhelpful thought pattern. And to compound the difficulty of it is there's a lot of self-judgment behind those thoughts, or when you recognize it's happening. Mine's not a tornado, it's a burning fire. But when I fall into it, I quickly judge myself. I'm not doing this right. I'm not good enough. I'll never get out of this. I'm the absolute worst. And those aren't true. I'm not the worst. But those thoughts cause me a lot of stress and a lot of inner turmoil. And so the problem is we've already attached that negative feeling to the thought before we even question its validity. And it's exhausting.
Almost like the judgment. You mentioned this judgment, like I would imagine, well, at least for me, like when that judgment comes in, like you said, I'm the worst, I'll never be good at this, I'll never be able to get out of this. That feels like that's the worst part. It's that judgment that you have on yourself that is triggered by that thought.
Mhm. I don't know about you, but that judgment zaps my energy and it really impacts my mental health. It impacts how I show up to work. It impacts
Hmm.
my motivation. It's just downright exhausting. Mhm.
Hmm.
So, thank you for sharing your personal experience. Another one I saw in my work with a member is I was working with someone who was struggling to find motivation at work. She kept sharing the ways she should be performing or delivering at work, and she had a near constant inner dialogue of the things she needed to be doing and how she was failing at them. And so by the time she actually sat down to her desk, she was exhausted and defeated, and it makes it really hard to produce anything. And she kept falling farther and farther behind. And I know when my mood is low, it's hard to operate 100% or be productive. And so, what we don't expect ourselves to produce our best work while working in an environment that's cold or super hot. So, how can we expect ourselves to perform in a state of inner turmoil? It's not realistic. And so, just being aware of the untrue and helpful thoughts and how they're usually based in self judgment can be really powerful.
Many of our listeners here, they know that I'm a mom. I have a young kiddo. Of course, this last year has been extra challenging, as all of us, whether you're a parent or not. And I know my exhausted moment is almost the first time I wake up in the day. I wake up and I evaluate the time. Am I late? Do I have to get my daughter to school? I got to get her fed. What email am I missing? And so that kind of turmoil, that judgment of like, I'm so behind, I'm going to fail, happens sometimes when I first wake up, happens sometimes when I sit down at my desk. I think that is such a valuable example that you gave, Kenzie, is if you're listening and you can identify that judgment that you typically have on yourself when a thought kind of triggers a feeling or a feeling triggers a thought and then that triggers a mood, I would bet, and Kenzie, you tell me if this is true or not, like I bet that's very constant for those listening, given their certain times of day. Like maybe that's constant for you at night, maybe that's constant for you in the morning. And I know a lot of my own self judging thoughts happen at the same time, the same experience, or the same roadblock that I may face. Is this true? Do people have these similar experiences for their own kind of thought process?
Yeah, coming back to that word thought pattern. It's something that kind of happens on a set cadence. And not only do we have our own personal patterns, but are there some really predictable patterns for human as a whole? And so some of the most common types of unhelpful thought patterns are number one is all or nothing thinking. And this is when you see no gray area. Something is always true or never true. Life is either fine or it's absolutely terrible. And so a good example of this is my coworker shot down one of my ideas in a meeting, and now I hate my job and I need a new one. Another common one that I probably see most often in my coaching is catastrophizing. And so this is thinking of small setbacks as full blown catastrophes. I do this one. So, for
Yep,
example, I
guilty,
left my friend's
guilty.
birthday gift at home. Yep. And now I've ruined the party and our friendship. It's all done. Or, yep, personalizing. I have a feeling this one might
Oh,
stick with you, is sometimes
yep,
we convince ourselves we're the cause of someone else's behaviors. And even when there isn't any evidence, again, it's not matching with reality. For example, my mom hasn't responded to my text. I must have made her mad. The other kind of really common one is shoulding, using should and must statements that push you to think you have to be or act in a certain way based on a strict personal or social standard. For example, my friend asked me to host her baby shower. I should do it, and I must make the best party ever, or I'm a bad friend. I just want to emphasize these are patterns that we've recognized in humans. We all do them. At one time or another, you're going to fall into this trap of untrue thinking. Some of it, like kind of some of the patterns developed when we were kids. Sometimes they come from the impact of stress, but there's no need to judge or look down upon yourself. Please recognize that. It's so easy to fall into the trap of judging yourself or feeling disappointed or frustrated. And so when you're frustrated, it's going to impact your mood. So just be aware and give yourself a little bit of grace.
totally. And everyone, I'm sure, is identifying their own thought pattern and where that comes up, when it comes up, and how consistently it comes up. And how do we get out of these? What are your go to ways to support your members in changing or disrupting these unhelpful patterns and create new ones?
Yeah, good news is we can create new mental pathways and patterns. It just takes practice. First, you have to identify that you've fallen into an unhelpful thought pattern. So slow down and recognize that our thoughts are not facts. Take a moment to think again and ask yourself, is this thought true Or is it an assumption or self-judgment that's not true? And once you've recognized that, then you can try a different thought on and see how you feel. Do you feel better or at least more in control with this new thought? And then you do this every time you recognize your old thought pattern. And you can catch yourself and create a replacement or alternative thought that takes you down this different path towards a different mood or a better feeling mood. And so, using the example of catastrophizing from above, that I left my friend's gift at home, now I've ruined the party and our friendship, replace it with something like, I forgot the birthday gift at home, but now we have another excuse to get together, just the two of us. And so, a lot easier said than done, but luckily we have a great tool, keeping a thought record, to help you with replacing those thoughts. And so, to start your thought record, first write down your initial thought, i.e., what's the first thing that crossed your mind? Then challenge that thought. Prove it unhelpful by asking a couple questions. What facts do I have to support it? What does my thought overlook or ignore? What assumptions am I making? Then next, once you've kind of proven it unhelpful, you're going to come up with a different response. Write out a different way you could respond to the situation that prompted your unhelpful thought. Then write down an alternative thought, a helpful thought that you can choose to have. And take a couple notes on what you would like to do differently if you're in a similar situation the next time. And then last, check on your mood. Once you've challenged it and come up with a different thought, how are you feeling? Hopefully it's better. And so by going through this process, you're replacing those unhelpful thought patterns with helpful ones. And the sooner you catch that unhelpful thought pattern and mount a defense against it, the less likely it's to have a negative impact on your life.
That is so perfect. And I know that we will have a link to that thought record in the show notes. So for those listening, they can pull that up and do this on your own time in those moments where you catch yourself, for sure. So, Kenzie, you have provided so much goodness here. But if you could leave people with just one helpful thought, what would it be?
Yeah. So start by being kind to yourself. Don't judge your unhelpful thoughts or yourself. This is a journey that you're not alone on. Again, we're all human. We all fall into these thought patterns. But by defaulting towards self kindness, you're going to stop the unhelpful thought patterns in their tracks. And so, this self kindness is what paves the way for new thought patterns.
Thank you so much, Kenzie, for chatting with me today, helping me personally, hopefully helping our audience as well, and really giving us some great examples and tools to help us notice when we're falling into those unhelpful thought patterns. And for me, noticing that self-judgment that instantly gets triggered by those thoughts, those feelings, that mood. And to your point earlier, we are human. We are all human. It happens to all of us. When you notice a negative feeling come up, find that thought that it's attached to for you. And if you find an unhelpful or untrue thought pattern, challenge it. Begin to rethink it. Is this true or not? And most importantly, start by being kind to yourself. And over time, it will become easier to think helpful, mood, and life-enhancing thoughts. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining this Hot Topics. Until next time, be well.